Hello and welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is author Steve Doherty. We're going to be talking to him about himself, but also about his new book, Crossroads, which is also a Jonathan Preston novel. Steve, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And for those who are familiar with the program, we like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched lately, if we liked it or we hated it or we're just totally indifferent to it. I will go first just to give Steve a little time to collect his thoughts. So I had the good fortune to watch three extremely different films over the past couple of days. The first one was a Taiwanese movie I found on Netflix. It's called Left-Handed Girl. And one of the people involved with it is Sean Baker, who was also behind last year's Best Winner picture of Honora. I think he was involved with, he was a producer and he was also I guess, the English language writer for the screenplay. But it's a very charming, kind of a harsh film because it really takes a look at life in Taiwan, especially from the female point of view and several generations of this one family. It's very intense, but it's still a very charming movie in the end. And the other two, one I don't even remember how I found out about it, but it is I want to say it's from 1950 or 1951, and it was almost like, hey, Sunset Boulevard was popular, let's capitalize on that. So it's a movie called Hollywood Story, and it's kind of a noir light. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. Not, and also not the most thought-provoking film, but it was still enjoyable. And the other one, totally leave your brain at the side of the door when you go in. A shark movie on Netflix called Thrash, where a coastal town in South Carolina gets flooded and, of course, is inundated with sharks. And it's only an hour and a half long. So make of that what you will. Also, not the most effort put into the script, but that's just my opinion as a writer. Steve, what about you? Anything good or bad, reading or watching?
I like to go back and read all the best novelists for the genre that I write for, the thriller, military thrillers. I've been going back and reading some Vince Flynn.
Okay.
Vince Flynn wrote, I think, a dozen novels before he passed away several years ago at a very young age. He's a very good novel, wrote a great series. And the one I'm working on right now, which I'm kind of really involved in, is a guy by the name of Mark Greaney. He's written a series called the Gray Man series. They're all spy novels, but this is more in the context of the Middle East and stuff like that. But it takes you all over the world.
Oh, that's
It's a very, very good series. I like to go out there. I like to read the best of the best because I want to make sure that what I'm putting out is, equal or
hmm
better than what they're doing. So
Sure,
I
sure.
have to compare myself all the time to the best. That's the only way I can get better.
That is a great way to put it all into perspective. As soon as you said military thriller, I immediately went to Tom Clancy because I'm not as familiar with the genre, and that's the one name that I do know.
I've,
So,
basically have read almost all of his novels.
uh-huh.
And, that's probably was, I started reading military thrillers when I was in grade school. They had these little pocket books, paperback books from
hmm
after, like post World War II that got me all in. One of them, I remember one of them was called the Spitfires, and there was a bunch of other flying ones. So I was into all that stuff. And then as I progressed, getting older, that genre
hmm
appealed to me more than any other one.
Okay, I was going to say, would you kind of say that Tom Clancy's almost like the gold standard, that not that you're trying to copy or emulate his writing style or his stories, but you're trying to write in that kind of vein?
I would say he's a pretty good standard to look at.
hmm
Yes. He goes and he does what I do. I basically patterned myself a little bit after him. I go into excruciating detail on some of the weapon systems.
hmm
And like he does, I flew jets in the Air Force. I like the detail about the weapon system, so I go into a lot of detail on the planes that they fly, the weapons that they use, the automobiles, you name it.
I was going to say that is one of my questions because that is one of the first things I noticed when I started reading your book, Crossroads, is that, yeah, there is an exceptional amount of detail, but we'll get into that when we start talking about the book. But first, we're going to talk about Steve Doherty, the writer. I'm going to read the author bio, which is on the back cover of Crossroads. Steve Doherty is a retired United States Air Force officer. While in the Air Force, Steve flew the T-29C, KC-135A, and the T-43A aircraft. He is the author of 5 historical fiction thrillers and 4 children's picture books. Very diverse there. Steve obtained his undergraduate degree from Texas State University, a master's from Chapman University, and a doctorate from the United States Air Force. Steve is also a third Dan instructor in Taekwondo and teaches martial arts to children and adults with disabilities. So, Steve, let's talk about you and your writer's origin story, if you will. I mean, were you always a writer at heart? Were you a voracious reader from your youth, or is this all something that maybe came to you a little bit later in life?
I was a voracious reader as a youth for those military thrillers
Hmm.
because my dad he was a pilot in World War II. He flew B-24 bombers, so I kind of gravitated towards that genre of books. But I can tell you right now, going through high school, undergrad, and even grad school, I hated writing.
Oh,
I mean, almost with a passion because
sure.
I didn't, I didn't think I was a good writer. Now, I had a high school English teacher by the name of Maggie Webb, and I went to a small high school in Texas called Flatonia, which was 10 miles from where I live. We had to take a bus. And she had a master's degree in English, and she almost every week we had a writing assignment, and I just hated it. But she always told me, she said, Steve, you write really good. But I hated it. I could not stand it. And so when I went and got my master's degree from Chapman, I took a non-thesis program and I took like 7 extra courses so I wouldn't have to write a thesis. That's how bad I
Hmm.
hated writing. So it's just, it, I evolved over time.
Okay.
I got my master's, I think, in 1982. I mean, my doctorate from the Air Force in 1982, and it was a doctorate in flight education. It
Hmm.
was one of the things that came along with being a flight instructor in the Air Force. I was there for 5 years, and I had so many hours on the platform teaching, so many hours in the simulator teaching, so many hours in the airplane teaching that they gave me an applied doctorate, apparently, whatever they called it. So I go, okay, that's good. And then I got transferred from there to Fort Worth, Texas, and I was working in a command post, which has command and control of all the aircraft when they're flying and on the ground and stuff. And I was on a late night shift, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And about 2 a.m., I got bored and I reached around, and there was a Reader's Digest group of them on a shelf back there. And I just picked one out and started thumbing through it at 2 a.m. in the morning. And there was an article in there about ballooning during the Civil War. And I read that and I go, that's interesting. I said, ballooning, and they talked about how they went up. They were observers. They went up and in their balloon at night and they counted the number of Confederate campfires, and they came back down and they from that they calculated the approximate number of Confederate troops. And I'm going, that was pretty clever. Until the Confederates started firing on them and killing some of them. So it didn't last very long, I don't think, but it was, fairly accurate at the time. And so I was so excited about that. I went and got 6 books from the library, and I decided I was going to write an article.
Hmm.
And I put together a little 1,200-page article on America's first Air Force, which was back in during the Civil War. And lo and behold, I submitted it to an Air Force periodical. They published it. And from that time on, you couldn't stop me from writing.
Wow.
because
Okay, I just want to clarify. You said 1,200 page article or
no,
1,200
no,
word
no,
article?
1,200 word article. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
okay. I was going to say that's a
1,200
long
page.
article.
That was a long article. Yeah.
That's a phone
12,
book of article.
a 1,200 word article, and that kicked my writing career off. And it just like from there, you couldn't stop me from writing. I think while I was in the Air Force, my remaining 12 years or something like that, I was published some 30 or 40 times after that. So
Were
just
that were those all like historical articles or were and
no,
it's
some of them were modern day. I was when in the Air Force when I left Fort Worth, I went to Dayton, Ohio to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I was in the headquarters there, and I was doing my job so well, I got noticed by the four-star general or somebody, and they say, "Hey, we want you to come be one of our directors for quality." And I go, "Okay, whatever." And so I got to go be, I was a major at the time, and there was a colonel in there in the office and two civilians, and we were the quality office, and we reported directly to the four-star general. Well, they sent me all over the country to all this training. And so I became by default the guy, okay, you write the policy, you help write this, you write that, let's get the curriculum. You manage all the curriculum development teams out there and get the training going. And so I probably wrote maybe a dozen articles about the quality management in the Air Force and stuff like that. I wrote articles on flying in the Air Force, some of the mercy missions we had and things like that. So it was just, I wrote on leadership. It was just anything I could write on that I thought I could, get a grasp.
Mhm.
I would write on it and I'd get it published somehow.
Okay, so that leads to the inevitable question. So you're writing all of these articles. What was it that led to writing fiction? Especially, a lot of your stuff seems to be historical fiction.
Okay, well, and I retired from the Air Force in 1993. I put 20 years in and I got out. The reason I got out at 20 was because working for the four-star general, I developed high blood pressure.
Hmm.
And they put me on medication. And when you take medication, that kills your flying career. So I got out at 20 and said, okay, let's go get a real job. My mother's always asked me when I was out flying around the world, when are you going to get a real job, And I'm going, well, I'm having a lot of fun doing what I'm doing. I've been around the world 8 times and I'm waiting to go number 9. And they give me a $30 million Tonka toy to fly around the world in, and I'm going, I love that. So but to get back to the question, in 1995, I was contacted by a gentleman in Columbus, Ohio. He was a World War II veteran, and he had talked to my wife. My wife had given him my story and told him I'd written a bunch of articles, and so he calls me up out of the blue. She forgot to tell me about him. So he calls me up and says, I'm so and so. I want you to write my story. And I'm sitting here clueless on the phone and go, well, who are you and what the hell did you do? And so he tells me, well, at the end of the war, World War II, I was one of the most successful covert operatives to come out of the war in Asia. And I go, okay, you got my attention. Let's talk. And he says, well, I can't. And so I'm just like, dude, you called me. And he says, well, here's why I can't. It's a month from the day that the Japanese surrendered. On that day, I can talk to you because everything I did was classified top secret for 50 years.
Whew, wow.
So I had to wait 30 days and we got together. We planned on getting together. And then I interviewed him for about 7, 8 months.
Hmm.
Got his exclusive story before he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 96. From 95 to 96, I was interviewing him. Well, then I make a couple moves and I have all my material. And lo and behold, I get to my house in New Albany here finally after 3 or 4 moves. And when I retire from my next job, and then my next job, I worked as a telecom engineer here, and then I had my own roofing company. So after I got through with those two businesses, I went to looking for my materials. Well, I couldn't find them.
Hmm.
And I'm going, doggone it. I told that guy I'd write a book about him. So, and I said, okay, well, let's go clean up the basement. Maybe it's down there. So I'm cleaning up my basement that I haven't been in probably in 3 years. And lo and behold, I find my material.
Hmm.
Okay, let's go do it. And it was just, and I go, I've never written a book before. I didn't even know how to start. And so I got my manuscripts out that I typed up and I went through them and I go, okay, I remember all this stuff. And so I sat down at my computer, put my hands on my keyboard, and I go, okay, how do you start this thing? And so all of a sudden, a bolt of lightning like hit me an idea, and I just sit down and I start typing on my laptop.
Hmm.
And I couldn't stop for 10 hours.
Wow.
And I did that for almost an entire year. I would write anywhere from 8 to 14 hours a day nonstop. Well, I'd stop for lunch
Sure.
and bathroom breaks and stuff like that. But at the end of 12 months, I had written 2 full books about this guy, about his missions behind Japanese lines.
Mm.
And I'm going, okay, well, that's good. Now, what do I do with this stuff? I knew nothing about publishing. And so it was just, I knew nothing about editing. I didn't know anything. So I'm going, okay. I talked to people around, in the town here. Nobody knew anything about it. I said, okay, I guess I've got to go out and get on the internet and discover what I need to do next. And I found a company out of Oklahoma, and they seemed like a nice little company. I called out there and talked to them. They were really nice, and so they promised the world.
Hmm.
Man, we'll take your manuscript, we'll do everything, we'll do the editing, and we'll do, all this, that, and the other. We'll even do marketing for you. Pay us this much. And so I learned about 2 years later that they were basically what they call a vanity publishing company.
Hmm.
And that after, because over a 2 year period, I had people coming to us, Steve, there's a lot of mistakes in your first novel. What do you mean? That company, that publisher said they took care of all that stuff. He said, well, you better go check it out. Well, they went bankrupt, the company.
Of
And
course.
then and about on the third year or after that book was published, I finally got my manuscript back, and they sent me the digital copy. And so I took it, and I had, Word, a spell check program on my computer by that time, and I ran it through spell check. And I swear to God, that company that did the publishing of that book, they never even put it through spell check.
Mm.
There were so many errors. I was appalled. In fact, I was embarrassed. And I said, okay, this ain't going to happen again. So I had to go out there on the next time. I said, okay, I'm going to self publish. So I had to go find a company I could self publish with. And then I found a person here in Columbus who had done editing before, but not at a professional level. But after she did my first book there, it was so professionally done. I go, okay, you're going to do all my books. And so she's done, I think, 4 of my books and has done a really good job of them. I mean, she just so much nitpicking, it's unreal.
Mhm.
And I said, okay. And now I got, and today I got Grammarly. Grammarly helps me with my editing and spelling, because I'll just sit there and I'll write, and I'll get through 2, 3, 4, 5 chapters, and then I'll go back and say, okay, let's run it through Grammarly and see how good or bad it. Well, I'm just like, oh my God. Okay, let's set this aside. We'll do Grammarly check another day. I've got more writing to do, but when I write, I don't worry about spelling. I
Mhm.
don't worry about hyphenations or commas and stuff like that. I just write, and then I go back and reread it. And now I've had people ask me, well, what kind of process is that? You just sit down and it comes into your brain and you sit there and type. I said, basically, that's how I write. I can't explain how when the first time I sat down at a computer and all of a sudden my fingers just start typing, and the information was just like channeled into my brain and onto the keyboard. I'm going, oh, I kind of like this. Boy, keep this up.
Okay.
Yeah. And
That
so I'm just sitting there amazed. I'm sitting there writing 10, 12 hours a day. And my family looks, aren't you kind of getting tired of this? No, no, I can't stop. It's just coming. It's coming and coming. And I had so much information that I needed to get on paper or into the computer and about this guy and what he did. And so at the end of the 12 months, I had two books written. And of course, I told you the first one, when they took the first one and did it, I found out 3 years later how embarrassing it was because they didn't do the things that they said they were going to do.
right, right.
So it was just like crazy. And I almost quit writing at that point because they took a lot of money from me. They promised the world. So I kind of tell people now, be careful. You need to, unless you can get a big five publisher off the bat, stay away from the vanity publishers and self-publish, basically.
Okay. Well, let's talk about those books eventually led you to work on Crossroads. So, what I like to ask the guest is for screenwriting, it's the elevator pitch, like that 5 second. Here's what the story is. But for writers or authors, it tends to be more like the cocktail party pitch. So you're at a cocktail party and someone says, "Oh, Steve, I hear you have a new book called Crossroads. Tell me what it's about."
Well, Crossroad is a continuation of a story about Jonathan Preston. He was a World War II covert operative that come out of the Asia, China, Burma, India theater. And this one, towards the end of the war, during the war, they had fought Japanese spies there in India and China. The Japanese would send spies into Calcutta to try to take out American spies, that they knew were trying to take them out. And so they find out towards, at the end of World War II, the name of the top guy, who he was. And he was on the wanted list for war criminals, but he got away and went into hiding. And then he started his own I guess a criminal organization after the war.
Hmm.
And not quite a yakuza, but he would go out and he'd steal secrets, trade secrets and stuff like that, and do things like that. And these guys were, the Americans were still in Japan at that time, and these Jonathan Preston and his team of operatives were looking for this guy because he was one of the guys that was involved in taking the gold and silver and all the antiquities out of China, Burma, India, those places that they invaded during the war, and hoarded those. So that, took them and hid them in caverns and caves and places like that, so they would have all this wealth after the war. So Jonathan Preston and his team are after this gold, and they find out that this one guy that they've been looking for, this war criminal, is the one who had maybe 20 tons of this stuff
Hmm.
secreted in a place close by one of his 1,000-acre estates that he had there in Japan. So, and they go after him.
Hmm.
And one of the beginning of the book goes back to 1571. It's during the samurai period, and one of the battles between these several groups of samurais, there was a sacred sword that was salvaged out of one of the battles. And so that sacred sword uh, went to the emperor. After they rescued it, they gave the sacred sword to the emperor, and later on, the emperor gave it to a a family in Japan that had done something for the emperor. He gave them that sacred sword, and they were the keeper of that sacred sword. Well, during the war, the guy who had received the sword from he got it from his grandfather or something like that. And normally, when one of the male goes into battle in Japan, they take their family sword with them. So his father gives him this sword to carry with him in the battle. He went in the army as a lieutenant, so he needed a sword to carry. Well, he gets stationed in China, and he knows they are going to go against the Soviets in a tank battle. And he knows, he just feels like their Soviets are going to overwhelm them. And so he feels like he's going to die. So there's a Catholic church in the town where these guys were positioned. He takes the sacred sword and gives it to a Catholic priest. The Catholic priest saves it and says, I'll keep it for you till after the war. Well, the kid dies in battle, and after the war, when Jonathan Preston and his team of men go out looking for all this buried gold, they come across this priest in on the far east coast of China. He says, and where they had found and recovered some of this gold. And then the priest tells this Jonathan Preston a story about this guy and the sword. He says, why don't you take this sword back to Tokyo, Japan, and give it to the family? They will probably want to know that his son gave it to me to hold, and they would want it back. And so this sword, along with another sword, were two of the most famous swords to come out of Japan. And so when this former general, who is now an underworld chieftain, finds out that the Americans have these swords, he's incensed. He wants these swords back from these Americans, and so he comes up with this plan to get these swords. And of course, the Americans realize what he's doing, and they come up with a plan to counter him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
So,
so
oh, go ahead.
In the book, you find a place where there's something called the White Samurai, and the general, his grandmother had she was what's called prescience, where she had visions and stuff like that, and she had always warned him from the time he was like 9 years old, always beware of the White Samurai. And so when they found out from some other people that knew the general's story, that his grandmother had told him this story about the White Samurai, they developed this facade of what I call the kabuki play, that where they create the White Samurai. And they're using these two swords, ancient swords that this guy wants. So they're trying to draw him out of the background of the wherever he's hiding and get him out in the open so they can capture him. And so eventually he wants those two swords bad enough that he comes out of hiding, and then he and the Americans clash. And it doesn't end up good for him.
Okay. Okay, so I have to ask, so what was the inspiration for the story?
Well, I had gotten through my fourth novel, and I was at the end. I was at the end of all the stories that this guy had told me, and I had to come up on my own with a story. And I just watched a some kind of special on. It was like a 4 or 5 or 6 part special on one of the streaming channels about samurai. It was about an 8 hour thing, several different sagas there. And I go, I wonder if I could use that and those ancient samurai swords in any kind of part of my next novel. So I thought about that for several weeks, and I came up with this idea. Okay, let's run with it. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, that was always a good fallback.
And it turns out, I guess it turned out okay. I have had so much good feedback on this book, and then my fourth book is just unbelievable. I go, okay, maybe I am a good writer.
That's great. As we talked about a little bit earlier, there is an exceptional amount of detail throughout, especially regarding vehicles and weapons, and also some geographic stuff as well. So how much research was involved? Because based on how much information you're presenting, I mean, some of it sounds like it's based on your experience in the military, but also there's a lot of it that, I mean, it just seems like, okay, I have to include this, I have to include this, I have to include this.
Well, I patterned myself the way I write most foremost after Tom Clancy. I like the
Hmm.
way that Tom Clancy went into and just graphically described all the weapon systems. And I said, I like that. And I call myself an average guy. I don't like to look at myself as an intellectual or anything like that. I'm just an average. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Texas. You know, I was probably the least likely to succeed out of my high school class, because I was just like, okay, what are you going to go do? And I said, well, I'm going to go fly jets in the Air Force. They go, no, you're not. You're a four eyes. You wear glasses. I said, well, that's okay. Somewhere, somehow, something's going to happen where they're going to need aviators who wear glasses, and I'm going to be one of them.
Hmm.
And so I went, from all through high school and undergrad, just knowing that something was going to happen. Well, I graduated in December of 72 and nothing had happened. And I came back from an interview. I went from Central Texas, close to Austin, all the way on the east side of Houston to a town called Galveston for an interview at the University of Texas Medical School, one of them there. And I came back, and my wife said, well, how'd it go? I said, well, they offered me a job paying $2,200 a year in 1972.
Hmm.
And then I ran into one of my buddies from college. And he says, hey, Steve, guess what? I'm going to go fly jets in the Air Force. And he wore glasses. And I go, Harold, something happened I don't know? He says, yes. Both the Navy and the Air Force are short of aviators right now. And they said, as long as you're correctable to 2020 and wear glasses, we'll take you. And I go, yes. I raised my hand. I went that week. I went down, took the Navy and the Air Force officers exam. And I said, whoever calls first gets me. Thank God the Air Force called. Otherwise, I would have been flying off a carrier somewhere. But that's how I got to some of this stuff. But anything
Okay.
else? I
All right. No, that's fine. I also wanted to
lost
ask.
my train of thought there for a
Okay,
second.
no. So as a follow-up to that, as you alluded to in the summary of the story, historical details really play a significant role in the story for both medieval Japan and for a lot of since the majority of the story is post-World War II. Again, was there lots of research on your part in trying to I guess to really make the story as accurate as possible and on so many different levels, geographically and politically and even like culturally.
My goal when I started writing these books were to be historically accurate as possible. And did I have to do a lot of research? You would not believe the amount of research I've had to do. And this was back before they had Chat GPT and all this
Hmm.
stuff. And I was going to libraries, I was getting on the internet, I was buying textbooks and stuff, studying all this stuff about Japan, about samurai, about World War II, things that I didn't even know because, I was familiar a little bit with the European War because that's the war my dad was in,
Hmm.
but I knew nothing about Japan or Asia. And so I said, okay, this is, and I can't tell you, I probably have read a couple, 200 or 300 books on that region of the world now just to get to where I am. And these days, when I go out and do research, I'll go on the internet and I'll look at stuff and read stuff. I go, that's not accurate. I wonder who wrote that.
Hmm.
And so because so I've after thousands of hours of research and then writing, it just it takes a lot of research to do this stuff. And I'm working on book number 11 right now, but all that research I did for the first 5 books has just built and added on to my expertise and I've just basically kept almost everything in that Asia area of the world except this latest book I'm writing right now goes into the son of Jonathan Preston, is now in the spy business.
Ah, okay.
So it's like a transition there from the old warrior to the new warrior.
Sure, sure. I
But
have to ask, were there any details that you found during this very extensive research effort? Were there any details that you wanted to include, but for one reason or another just were unable to, that you thought, oh, this would be a great place to include that, but if I do that, it's going to bog the story down, or that's like getting too inside baseball, so to speak.
I had some feedback from people saying uh, your detail is almost excruciating. And I go, so you're saying I need to lighten up a little? And they go, that would help. Okay. But these guys that were reading this they were like ordinary people like me. I didn't go to professors and stuff like that. So read this manuscript. I went to guys like me, one of my friends down in Texas, he's a retired detective from the Houston Police Force. He read it and so this is really good, Steve, but boy, you go into excruciating detail. Okay, maybe that's a hint. So yes, I had to back off on some of the detail because I mean I got into it
Sure,
and
sure.
big time, especially on the aircraft.
Of
I could really,
course.
I know aircraft. I could really get into it.
I totally
But
understand
as
that.
far
Again,
as
the book
yeah,
is Crossroads. Steve Doherty.
but as but as far as the weapons and stuff like that, yeah, I thought it would be best, you know, that most people these days they don't know what an M1 is. They don't know what a 1911 Colt 45 is. That's why I have to on some of the weapons and stuff like that. I go into more detail. I do the same thing for some of the automobiles
Hmm.
and Jeeps and stuff like that too, because it's not like when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s that there was a lot of people around that were World War II veterans. They knew all this stuff, and when they were reading stuff, yeah, we understand this stuff.
Hmm.
People these days, they need more data. I think, but they don't need an overabundance of it.
Hmm.
They just need enough to make it interesting and then move on. Okay, all right, they got that. And so every time there's a new weapon system or a rifle or something, I try to go into at least a paragraph detail about what it is to
Okay.
give some detail and
Sure.
why it was favored to be used.
Hmm. Okay. So again, we're talking to Steve Doherty about his book Crossroads. I actually wanted to ask you about the story. So was it pretty much in place from the outset when you started, or did it take time for you I guess, work out the details or figure out, okay, what's the primary plot of the story? What are you know, I guess what are you trying to put together
Well,
when you started?
the primary plot was to find this rogue general that they didn't capture and then put through the trials, for at the end of the war, is to capture this rogue general who then started I guess, a rogue organization, corrupt criminal organization that was, and towards the end of the book, in there, they're working with the Chinese, and this guy he bought a bunch of ships with all the gold he had. He had enough money. He bought some of these Liberty ships, and he was going into China, and they were delivering. His company was delivering munitions and weapons to North Korea. So all that stuff, some of that stuff was adding up. This guy was expanding his criminal empire, and it was the American military didn't like it. So they said, we've got to do something about this.
Okay. Okay. So I also wanted to ask, though, it could be categorized as historical fiction. Are there a lot of details? If we've already established that, a lot of details are historically accurate based. And also, you also incorporate a lot of real life characters. I know, like MacArthur and Harry Truman are
Yes.
significant parts, but also, I mean, how many of the characters are either real people or based on real people? Or like this person is what's the word? Like, not a conglomerate. It's this person is a collection of these people put into one person.
Well, the guy I write about, Jonathan Preston, that is a pseudonym because the real guy wouldn't let me use his real name.
Okay.
He said if the Japanese found out he was the guy that did this, they would send a team to the US to wipe out his family. Now, I don't know if I really believe that, but he said it. I said, okay, I won't use your real name. So I came up with a pseudonym for this guy. And then a lot of this stuff, when you're writing historical fiction, you have to take some of those real characters from the past, and especially in a military, and you have to weave them into it, but you also bring them into the characters that you now make up. And so they're gonna be interacting. Most of the characters in the book are fictional characters that I had to come up with. Jonathan Preston, when I was interviewing him, he was telling me about the three or four guys that he worked with, and he gave me a lot of detail about them and how good they were. They were just like him. He was uh, he was recruited in 1939, I guess when no, sorry, I forgot to go mute. He was recruited in 1939 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt told his War Department to go out and recruit the best and the brightest athletes in this country right after the Nazis invaded Poland, I believe.
Hmm.
And so they went around the country, and he was one of 42 guys that they recruited, and all of them were top athletes in some field, and all 42 of them had eidetic memories or 100% recall memories. And they were very athletic. They were sharp and smart. And so if you're gonna put guys out there and they're gonna be spies and covert operatives, those are the type of guys you want behind enemy lines. You want the guys that are smart, that remember faces and details and stuff like this. So I had to do a lot of research on guys like him. Okay, how do these guys just don't pop out of the woodwork, do they? Are they everywhere? I've only met one guy in my life that had 100% recall, and I guess maybe they're more common now than not. I don't know. But he was a brilliant guy. Is all I know. And the other three guys on his team were just like him. They had 100% recall and memory. They were either engineers or outstanding in their career fields, or they were young men who didn't have a degree or something, but they all had those characteristics that they were very competitive in sports, the top of their field in sports, and they were the sharpest dudes in the basket.
That's great. I also want to comment there are emphasize a lot of subplots and an even bigger cast of characters. Now, how did you map out each storyline, but also keep track of what character was doing what? I mean, did you have like a big board and you have a ton of index cards posted up? Did you just have like, okay, here's this character, here's what they're going to do, here's this other character, and here are some potential times where their storylines can intersect?
I had to create like a Vita or something on each individual, like a biography
Hmm.
on each individual, and I keep that in my computer. But as far as mapping it out and stuff like that, no, I just did it all up here in my brain. But see, I'm the type of person when I write, I'll write 10 chapters, and then I'll go back to the first chapter and I'll reread everything to make sure the flow and everything goes, because like you say, there's some spider webs that go out with these different characters and stuff. And I make sure that it all comes back and flows properly. And then I'll write the next 10 chapters. And then I'll go back and I'll read from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 20 to make sure that the flow is proper. And that's, when you do this kind of I guess I looked up what kind of writing style I had, and they called it flying by the seat of your pants. I some people call it shotgun or throwing mud on the wall and see what sticks.
Hmm.
So I said, okay, I guess if that's my writing style, whatever. But for me, how it works is that I'll write, and then I go, okay, I don't have 100% recall. I got a pretty good memory. So, but I want to go back and I want to read it all and reread it. Okay, how did I do on that? Okay, I'm satisfied. And if I'm not satisfied, I go back and do a major rewrite. I got through 57 chapters of a book about 2 years ago, and I ended up just I didn't toss it. I just quit because no, this isn't where I want to go. So sometimes as an author, if you're writing a book and all of a sudden you're 58 chapters into a 65 chapter book, and all of a sudden, I don't like this where it's going.
Hmm.
Nope, I'm not happy with this. Sometimes you have to learn to put it aside. And that's exactly what I did. And I started a whole new book. Now, I did take some of those chapters out of that and
Hmm.
oh, I could use that here and use that and use this. So it made for, I didn't end up dumping everything and throwing it all away. But sometimes you have to stop, assess, rewrite. Sometimes you have to just, nope, toss it.
Okay, that's great. I also, so that kind of also the follow up to that would be, were there ever times, even while you were reading what you'd just written, were there times when you would almost lose track of a character or go back and kind of see, like, when was the last time we saw them? Because there was one character who I like, the last we had seen of them before we got to the chapter where they've returned, that the Japanese were sending like a hit squad after this character. And I was thinking, okay, it's probably been like at least 4 or 5 chapters since we saw them. And then I was like, he couldn't have forgotten about it. And they also didn't mention that
Well,
they got him. And then I think like 2 chapters later, it's like, and they start off like saying that character's name and whatever they were doing at the time. And I think, aha, so was that part of the overall scheme, or was that something like, oh, I forgot about this guy, got to put him back
well,
in.
no, sometimes it's an afterthought, I guess, going when I get on a lead and I'm writing and I know where it's going, and there's a group of characters, you can't always use all of them.
Hmm.
You got to focus on two or three, and then take where that leads, but then you got to come back and bring these other ones into it eventually. But yes, that can be trying on a person, to keep up with all those characters, and it just it that's why I go back and I read and I reread and I reread to
Hmm.
make sure that I didn't drop anything, that I didn't mention one guy at chapter 5 and then he shows up in chapter 55. And I don't
Right.
want that to happen. So yes, that's why I'm always continuing going back and reading. If I had an eidetic memory, I wouldn't have to worry about that, but I don't. So I do it the old fashioned way. I have to work at it. And that's my writing style is I'm constantly rereading, reassessing, rewriting. And if at some point where you just say, nope, I'm not happy, then you got to learn to toss it and not feel bad about it. And it's just like I thought I was gonna be beside myself. Oh my God, there's 90,000 words I'm throwing away, and I just said, no, get over it. And that's what I did, and started writing the next novel. But I found out, okay, I can take some of those chapters and incorporate them in here. And basically, that's kind of an eclectic way of writing. It's a lot of people out there. No, I've got to have an outline. I've got to have a little spider chart and this, that, and the other. I go, no, I have an ADHD brain. I can't follow all of those things on a graph. You know,
Hmm.
I have to think about them. And then I incorporate them where I need to incorporate them. But it's just how my brain works. I just not like a lot of people that have to have an outline. I remember in high school and college, they say, "Oh, you got to have an outline." I go, "Why?" You're going to write about three main points. You're going to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. That's the key to writing. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of like follow up on that one is that you stop, assess, and rewrite. Rather than just toss it, were you ever driven to, okay, I'm going to go back to see like where did things start to not work? Like, and then to like take it from there, like, okay, I can salvage this.
Well,
And would it get to the point where like, okay, I can't salvage this. I have to just completely start over? Or was it
right.
more like, I can, okay, I can fix this.
I I knew that I could. A lot of the book I was writing, I knew it was right. I just had gotten off track somewhere.
Hmm.
And so I just decided, no, let's put that aside. Let's start on a new book. Can I use some of those chapters? Yes, I maybe took the first 5 chapters and started all over.
Hmm.
And then some maybe I used maybe 2 or 3 or 4 other chapters later on. But I had just gotten so distracted in my writing, I guess. I that's the only possible way I can think is I must have got distracted and just went off on a tangent. And when I found myself off on that tangent, I go, oops, we got to stop this. And you got to know when to stop and say, okay, time out. Let's go back, reread it. Nope, I don't like it. And then I made it, I just said, let's going to put it aside. I didn't throw the whole thing away, but I probably used maybe 30% of it when I went and rewrote the next book. So I salvaged maybe 30% of it.
Okay. All right. That's great. That's great. What advice would you have for writers? I mean, especially because you write in a specific kind of genre or genres. What advice would you give for writers who want to take a stab at writing that particular kind of story? I mean, yours are historical. There's historical thriller. There's military aspects to it. Not that everyone has to copy that, but your, I guess, general approach to writing. What advice would you give for writers?
Number one, you have to be passionate about your subject. Number two, you have to be willing to put in the time to do the right kind of research. And there's a hell of a lot of research. For every hour of writing on some of these things, I probably may have put in 20, 30, 50 hours of research. And if not more, because I mean, I used to have in my office here, I've had books stacked up 10 high.
Hmm.
I probably in the last 3 years, I've given away close to 700 books just to give them back to Goodwill. Just get them out of my house and put them in bags, grocery bags. Take them, take them, take them. And so, that's a lot of reading that I've done. And so, the third thing is that you can't be afraid to start over. When you realize you got to a point where no, this is not what I want, you have to go back and reassess and then find out, like you said, where I went wrong.
Hmm.
I probably went wrong around chapter 25 in that 55 chapter book that I was writing. And so I go, okay, that's why I wasn't going to be able to use all of it, because I went off on a tangent and I didn't like that tangent. And then the other thing is a lot of people say, how do you write? I said, well, when I first started, I just started writing. It doesn't matter what you write, as long as you're passionate about it, you'll figure it out. And if you really, really want to be a writer, you'll do the work. The thing you can't be afraid of if you're going to be a writer is hard work. Because if you're going to be successful, you got to pay the price.
Yeah.
You got to work hard.
Yeah.
And
And
a lot of people don't. Oh no, I don't want to work that hard. Well, don't write. If you don't want to be a successful writer, don't write. Write short stories. If you just want to do writing, just write a little simple short story or a 1,200 word article and go publish it in a periodical on whatever the topics they have. A lot of people can do that. They're happy with that.
mm,
Me, I didn't know how to write a novel, but my buddy, the World War II veteran, I told him that I would. And so I had a commitment to that man. He died when he was like 88. And I said, I made a commitment to this guy. I was going to write a book about him. Well, it's turned into, that book you've got there is my fifth novel. And I'm already writing novel number 11. I've got, that many that I haven't published yet.
Right,
But
right.
see, I'm publishing children's picture books at the same time. I've published six children's picture books. I just sent in number seven to my organization that does the initial stuff, the initial formatting.
Okay. That's great. I was gonna say I'd like to say yeah, this thing ain't gonna write itself. So
No,
you have
no,
to put in the time
you
and the
can't be
effort.
afraid of hard work. No.
Right, right. Okay, we have been talking to Steve Doherty about his book Crossroads and all of the surrounding topics. Steve, thank you so much for being here today. This was a fascinating discussion. Where can people find out more about you and all of the books that you've written?
Well, I have a website. It's called Steve-Doherty-books.com. And that's where I put a blurb out there on all the books I've written. And then I'm on Amazon, I'm on Barnes and Noble, I'm on what is it, Goodreads,
Hmm.
and other things like that. So you can find me out there if you go looking for me.
And can they order the books directly through you at your website, or are there
No,
links
no,
to
I
the
don't.
links to the bookstores?
That turned out to be too much work for me. I'd
Okay.
rather spend my time writing than doing logistics stuff. And so I just let everybody buy them on Barnes and Nobles or whatever website they go on to buy them from, Amazon.
Okay, that's
And
great. And
I'm in three formats. I'm in ebook, I'm in soft shell, and hardback.
okay, well, this is a paperback that I have of
Paperback, yeah.
Crossroads from Steve Doherty. Steve, again, thank you so much for being here today.
Paul, thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure. And viewers and listeners, if you also enjoyed today's show, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. For the audio version of this show, the theme music by Mark Gunyon. Social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ.blog. This show is also on Blue Sky at Podcast CWL. I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram. Those are both at Pez Screenwriting. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books. Those are on Amazon. Like I said, that's Steve. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.